I would like to start, of course, by having a greeting, but acknowledging that we are all on different territorial and traditional lands today as we gather by teleconference, and acknowledge and thank our Indigenous peoples as well. So with that, we have a couple of guest speakers and from Security Operations who are going to give us a bit more background about inmate movement, about the CD and the changes that were provided to us, and then we'll get a chance for some discussion around any feedback that we have, questions, as well as input on the CD itself. So with that as introduction, Luke, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, just so you know, I don't think it's going to take that long because it's not it's not a very long CD. It only has 8 pages. But here at the NHQ in security, our policies are reviewed every 2 years. Like one of your questions was the background about the issue at hand. Mm-hmm. So the CD 566-3 was due to be revised. That said, probably 5 or 6 months ago, there was a board of investigation which recommended that in order to reduce the number of claim against the crown, that the inmates remain by their cell until the correctional officer goes and actually physically closes his door. That's one of the big change of the policy. All the rest remain pretty well the same. Now, the way that the inmate movement is set up, the movement procedures account for institutional security requirements while allowing inmates to participate in correctional programs, religious and cultural events, work assignments, and case management activities. So throughout, like in order to have a good routine throughout the day at the institution, it is very important that all the movements are pre-scheduled. So every day, essentially, the inmates do the same thing. That said, every institution, because of the physical the layout that they have, they're all different. Every single institution have their own local standing orders. And what the standing orders bring in is they take the policy and then they put it into procedures. So essentially it says when and why inmates can move from one area to another, the maximum number of inmates allowed to move at one time, how to monitor inmate movement, the requirements for the pass system, and what areas are out of bounds. So within the local standing orders, you will find it all the same requirements, if you want. Then, as far as the pass system, like they generally rely on paper, but there's also different methods. Like while they do the paper recordings, electronic system, telephone clearance, pickup or check-off list, or simply we escort the inmate physically. So in a nutshell, that's pretty well what it is. Do you have any questions for me?
I can start with a couple, Luke. This is Lori. Can you tell us a little bit more about the scenario and the Board of Investigation? What were the specifics of that one? It seems that it led to a claim against the Crown. So maybe give us a bit more background on what prompted that particular change, as well as if that's going to be a hardship in implementing.
Well, from what we did, just so you know, everybody responded. You're the last group that we have to intervene with in terms of the consultation. But the Board of Investigation identified that very often in the past that inmates would be claiming that they're losing their TVs, they're missing food, missing clothing. So they recommended that before they leave the unit or the range, that they remain by their cell until the correctional officer goes by and closes the door. So, and the Board of Investigation recommends it, but we in security don't have to accept everything that they recommend. But in this case, the DG Security thought it was a good thing, and we went ahead and we incorporated it in the policy.
Okay. Terrific. Now, can you also describe the pass system? It's not clear necessarily in writing what that really looks like in practice. So, do people literally carry around a piece of paper allowing?
Yeah, actually, like for example, let's say at 8 o'clock in the morning, all the inmates go to work or to programs. But let's say, for example, inmate Johnson has a dentist appointment at 9 o'clock. So he will go to his place of work, and then at 10 to 9, he would go and see the officer, tell him, the officer would verify if he is on the list for the dentist. Then he would write his name on the pass, the reason why he's going to the dentist. Then on it, he would have his name and his FPS, and then the inmate shows. Then he's radioed in from where he leaves to where he's going, and then when he shows up, he physically gives the pass to the next correctional officer. It's literally a pass.
Like a physical item that they
that he has to carry with him. But it's like I say, it's not like the officers don't know that he's coming. But in order to, if you show up in one area, you have to have the pass with you, otherwise you'll be returned to where you're from.
Okay. Now, one of the other questions was around the application of this CD. It excludes the community correctional centers. So can you speak a little bit more about how inmate movement or offender movement is monitored or supervised or set out for the community correctional centers? Because I know we have a couple of CAC members who are affiliated with CCCs.
Well, we don't have any correctional officers anymore in the CCCs. So, but essentially, the executive director would, a little bit like the same process that is done within the institutions. The executive director would draw up some standing orders and post orders, and then they would have to follow the same type of routine that we do in the institution. As if like they have to go and verify, and there's certain, but one has to understand there's a lot more movement in the CCC. It's in most of like the inmates report to the commissioners, as opposed to the commissioners going to them. I don't know, is that clear? Or like they do some rounds and counts, but nothing as exhaustive as what is going on in the institution.
Right.
And Laurie, if I could add, I'm Moira from we've got a CCC here in Toronto. That's where I'm from.
Right.
And yeah, they sign in and out also. They will sign in and out with the commissioner.
Exactly. So they go, they report, they sign in, they sign out, and every so often, depending on their conditions, they may have to call in every 2 hours or every 4 hours to give their whereabouts.
Okay. And these are all set out in standing orders? Is there a CD that oversees that, or is this is up to the executive director?
The CD, the CD always, the standing orders always derive from the CD, whether it's inmate movement or rounds and counts, or like the policy is what supersedes everything, but to make it practical, they use standing orders.
Okay. Now, in a couple of places in this CD, it seems there's discretion around, like for instance, in item 10, the pass system consists of one or more of the following methods, and it's depending on the site and the security level.
Exactly.
So tell us a little bit more about what are the differences that play out when, depending on the site, what's different between minimum, medium, and maximum in terms of how that pass system might be used or the times when movement is permitted, et cetera. Can you give us a little bit more sense around the practical parts of that?
In medium and maximum, the pass system, it's I'm not saying to make it difficult for the inmates, but it's definitely so staff know at any given time where they are. And so mostly the paper pass is being used, and also the list. Like quite often, as the officer or somebody at the institution is in charge of putting a list together, for example, for like I mentioned, the dentist, or it could be the doctor, or like there's different activities happening during the day. So in medium and maximum, it's mostly the paper record, the pass system. But when you're at the minimum institution, quite often, because the inmates have a lot more movement, so a lot more accessibility to all the institutions, then the officer would phone. They say, okay, Johnson will go from the main control to the school. So quite often it's done by telephone clearance.
Okay. And then at clustered sites, is the assumption that there's multiple methods used, again, based on the security level of the particular part of the institution? Okay.
But in the end, regardless of the type of the method that's being used, it's tailor-made to the institution, and they know what works best for them to get because you don't want to, I'll use the word cluster, you don't want to cluster the movement. It needs to flow. Like in order to have a good day, everything has to be fluid, if you want. Mm-hmm. Like even though we check the inmates a lot, we verify very quickly, okay, Johnson is here, that's him, and then you send him on his way.
Okay. Now, one of the other sections of the policy looks at the work outside of the perimeter.
Yep.
And it mentions about identifying inmates. So what methods are used to identify or distinguish different people and individuals?
The instructor would come to the main control, and when he takes out the inmate, he's given ID cards that he carries with him. The instructor would have the ID cards of all the inmates that are with him. So if something were to happen, if you were going to leave, like if the police shows up, then he would have the ID right away.
Okay. And those are collected then at the end of the work experience?
Yes.
And so that's
every day the instructor is given he comes, and whatever inmate goes out with him, they give him the ID card. And at the end of the day, he brings them back.
Great. Now, I know in a lot of places there's a lot of also attention here to movement changes, of course, based on procedures for emergencies and that sort of thing. And I know I work at a university, and we have, again, processes in place for any kind of emergencies, and we have to have identified muster points and collection points for groups of people. And I don't see anything like that in this policy. Is that part of the emergency protocols?
That would be part of that would be part of the contingency plans at the institution. But that said, because like the institutions are very big, depending on where the event takes place, sometimes they can isolate it right away, and sometimes like for example, if there's something going on on the range and there's 50 inmates in the gym, they'd probably leave the inmates in the gym until the situation is resolved. Okay. But there's no set place to okay, if something happens, we're going to put them there. The decisions are made as the event unfolds, if you want.
Okay. And from the way that you're speaking, emergencies sounds like altercations.
Altercations, or it could be a drunk inmate. It could be this. Quite often, it's this inmate fighting, like in the units or in the common rooms.
Okay. Now, a lot of the policies that CAC and REAC have been invited to look at, there's been a lot more attention to modifications sometimes for women and considerations for gender identity or expression. And I don't see anything in this particular CD that talks about any differences based on sex or gender.
No, but with some of the policies are you for example, the rounds and counts or searching, you have to be more specific. But in this case, it's all about just the movement of the inmates, whether you're a male inmate or a female inmate, and how the staff can regulate the whole thing so it makes it easy for everybody while being safe.
What about implications for the sex of escorts? Is that a consideration for...
Sorry, implications for?
The sex of the escorts.
While internal escort, it can be a male escorting a female, but if you go external escort, then you absolutely need at least one correctional officer the same sex as the offender, the inmate. But within the confine of the institution, an escort officer could be a male or a female, escorting a male or a female inmate. This makes no difference within the institution.
Okay. Now, one of the other questions is, we have, for instance, the Regional Psychiatric Center in Saskatoon has both men and women.
Yeah.
So this CD does not seem to cover any particular or different aspects when you have men and women co-located at a site.
They're co-located, but it's almost like they never mix. So if the female offenders, for example, have to go to the hospital, then they would shut down the movement to the male inmate until the female inmate made it to her destination.
Okay. So the distinction that there's never a mix, where is that actually documented?
Well, that wouldn't be a national policy. That would be at RPC, where they on how they run their institution, and I'm sure that because I've been a couple of times. I think it was the Churchill unit, and there was no way that the two could mix, male and female.
But you're saying that would be managed from a procedural point of view at the institution itself.
At the institution.
Okay, terrific. All right. Well, thank you for that. Now, I always have questions, so I've gone ahead and asked them all of mine, but I want to open it up to the floor for other folks to comment on questions that you have around the procedures, any comments you have about movement that you've noticed at your site, or anything else of relevance. So we'll open it up. Please identify yourself first. Just say hello and where you're from, and then go ahead and proceed with your comment. We have a quiet bunch today.
Hi, Laurie. This is Deirdre. I think that the questions that you posed and Luke's answers covered everything. I have nothing else to ask now.
Okay. Do you just want to talk maybe at your experience at EIFW, because again, you have multiple levels within. Any comments or issues that you've noticed around inmate movement?
Well, I'm not aware of any particular issues that I need to bring forward. I think that things are being handled in a very orderly way. Obviously, as Luke said, sometimes there is a need for some emerging response based on what's going on as an event unfolds. But as far as I'm aware, it's been going in an orderly way. There have been times when, because of things that are going on in the institution, our warden has needed to,
alter or
make changes. But then it's always been done in a very thoughtful way. So I don't have anything really to add.
Okay.
And when movement is restricted, it's always for a specific set of reasons. And when it's not punitive per se, it's because there's something that is requiring that for safety. And then when that situation has been resolved, then movement is restored. And I think, if I'm correct, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but I believe that our warden is very reluctant to have to use those measures, but does it when needed.
Mm-hmm. That's for sure. They really don't want to alter the routine too much unless they have to. A good routine is what makes an institution run very smoothly.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm saying we only because I worked in the institutions for 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
any other questions or comments?
No.
I have one, and actually it's because I don't understand the term. What's a non-scheduled call-out? That's in 12G, and I didn't understand that. That sounds very jargonistic, but what does that actually mean?
12G,
page 4 of 8. Has to do with the procedures for the PASS system. Will identify specific procedures to be followed during a non-scheduled call-out, but I'm not familiar with what that means.
Well, the procedures to be followed. A non-schedule is something that would be out of the normal routine. That's all.
And so a call-out is
everything else is scheduled. For example, they go to work at 8. At 11 they come back, but it could be it's just something out of the ordinary that they'd have to alter their routine a little bit.
So am I right about this, Luke? This is Deirdre. For example, suppose the E-Fry person arrived and it wasn't being expected to see inmate so-and-so, then that would be considered an unscheduled call-out.
The OCI, when they show up, sometimes it's at the last minute. That's exactly what it is.
Right.
Sorry, I was running out of examples.
Well, no, that's very helpful. I think actually sort of altered routine. I think the language is important because that does sound very jargonistic, and in a policy it could be interpreted differently, obviously. So, but that's helpful. The explanation has been very helpful.
Visits at the last minute, stuff like that, eh?
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
No.
Well, hearing none.
This is Deirdre. Laurie, sorry, this is Deirdre again. I was too slow on muting myself. I just did wonder whether Luke had actually answered, but he probably did, because one of your first questions was, is this causing any, are there any challenges or hardships that have been caused by this particular change, from the Board of Investigation's recommendation? So I don't know if Luke answered that. Has it caused any hardships? Is it requiring more staff time or more staff?
The thing is, we don't know just yet because the policy hasn't been promulgated, but given the reply from all the regions and everybody involved, only one institution in the Quebec region seemed to think that it was going to be a challenge. So, but we don't. The idea is nobody likes to have their stuff stolen, and we're giving them the chance to make sure that their cell effects are safe. And by standing by the door, well, they'll know that the officer closed the door behind them. But we may have to adjust within a year or so, or find a different way. But because we haven't tried yet.
Okay. What other recommendations came out of that Board of Investigation? Was this the only one that
was
CFC
the only one that had to do with the inmate movement.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. Great. So we'll stay tuned to see how it actually unfolds, and we'll prompt our CACs at different institutions to touch base within, once the policy has been promulgated, to see if there are any implementation issues.
Actually, that would be welcome, because obviously, if it's not working at all, we're going to have to think fast and have some other way to do business.
Well, that's
I have a question. This is Angela in Regina. So was there a lot of stuff being stolen before?
Well, it's hard for me to say, but I would say if the Board of Investigation identified this as being a problem, it must have been a trend that was developing, and they said, okay, we need to put a stop to this, and that's the recommendation they came up with.
So prior to this recommendation, how long would that inmate's door be open while he was being removed and taken to someplace?
Normally they go, for example, they go to work at 8, and the officer would be down the range between 5 to 10 minutes after.
Okay, so for 10 minutes, someone else could go into their cell. Okay.
So,
I guess if you wanted to steal something, I suppose you could.
Yeah, and let's face it, some of them are pretty clever in what they do, and there's like if an inmate is on a lot of medications, like prescribed medications, like you want to make sure that none of this goes missing either.
And they keep their medications in their cell?
Yep. Well, if the nurses or the doctor feel that the inmate is responsible enough, then they would give it to him.
Oh, okay.
In it's called a blister pack.
Right.
And like the prescription is on it, but the nurses from time to time will do a spot check, and they go to different inmates and they ask to see their cards.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure that they take him the way it's supposed to be. And if it doesn't work, then the inmate will have to go to the hospital to receive his medication.
Mm-hmm. And do some people falsely report thefts?
Well, I think that's another thing. That's what, by doing this, it's going to alleviate the fact that the inmate could, for example, if he's after a new TV or a new radio, like in this new system, he wouldn't be able to say, hey, Johnson just stole my radio,
Mm-hmm. And they'd have to purchase the TV and the radio themselves anyway, right?
Well, or if what happens if they, let's say, for example, there is something missing from his cell right now, and he said, well, that happened when I went to work. So he would put in a claim against the Crown, and if it's upheld, then the government would, or CFC, would end up buying a radio or a pair of jeans or a TV or whatever
right.
He's missing.
Which could get to be expensive.
Expensive if you have 12,000 inmates and,
right. Exactly. Well, it seems like a good idea then that someone stands there and locks the door and off they go.
Yeah, well, it just takes away from their ability to maybe lie about
anything.
Stuff. Yeah.
Right. Okay, thanks.
This is Deirdre. Luke, were there times when inmates were accusing staff of perhaps removing items? or was it all?
Well, actually, Wendy, it does. It comes up from time to time when we do cell searching, and then they say, "Oh, the officer went in, he dropped my TV," and you really have to be. And also, there's a lot of inmates that as the time go by, they end up with more things in their cell than what they should have. And then, so when you go and you do a big search, we end up removing a lot of stuff. Then they accuse the staff of stealing their belongings or a personal effect, when in fact it shouldn't have been in the cell. But all of this should be, if it's good officer, should be recorded. Everything that is taken out of the inmate cell should be recorded, and then given to the correctional manager.
And can you say a little bit more then, Luke, about what are CSC's responsibilities? It sounds like once for these possessions.
Well, for the personal effect, the inmate will go and with the admission and discharge officer and the officer, he would go through the whole list of everything that he has and the amount that he gives to his personal effects, if you want, and then that amount cannot exceed $1,500. Now, over the years, he may accumulate other stuff, and in the end, like I said, like every time the officers go in and search a cell, then they should have it's called a cell effect removal, and they record everything that they're taking out. So that way there shouldn't be any discrepancy between what the inmate says that he's missing and what the officers actually took out.
Okay, but inadvertent loss of materials, that is a CSC responsibility?
Well, if the inmate can prove that CSC, we didn't do our job properly, then yes.
Interesting. Great.
But he's got to prove almost that something wrong was done. You know, there's a whole floor here of inmate grievances.
Mm-hmm.
The next time you're here, you should take a look at it. It's very interesting.
Is this a fairly common grievance that gets put forward, or what estimate perhaps for us how frequent this actually occurs?
I'm not sure about the frequency, but actually I could inquire with the offender. It's called offender redress, where they get the grievance, and see if this is common, and I will let you know.
Great. Well, terrific. Thank you, Luke. Any other questions from the group?
Nope.
Well, not hearing any. So, Luke, thank you very much for your time today. Thanks for fitting this into your schedule. We'll provide I'll put together a written summary of some of the things and send that off to you. Thank you to Donna for setting this up for us from National Headquarters, and thanks to all of you for taking part today.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of the day, everybody. We have a French session starting in about 20 minutes if you're interested. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.